and welcome back to Animal Farm again, of course. This is part 9 of the series. Oh, today things are going to happen, drastic, radical things are going to happen in the story. That is maybe because we are about halfway through. I don't know how well you can see that, right? This is where we'll start today, and then another few pages, about 4 pages, and we'll be at half of the book, right? And that's not counting that there's an introduction here. So maybe we're in fact already a little bit past the halfway point. So yeah, that's nice. Animal Farm is not a super long book. I've told you this before, and things happen fairly quickly. Okay, well, so also I should maybe move a little bit more quickly, because I think people would enjoy these videos to be, well, let's say under 50 minutes. 45 would probably be better than 50. 1 hour is probably too much for people's taste. Okay, so I'll have to repeat some of the last part before again, and then I'll read you the next part. Okay, let's get to it. All of the animals came to look at Snowball's drawings at least once a day. Even the hens and ducks came, and were at pains not to tread on the chalk marks. Only Napoleon held aloof. He had declared himself against the windmill from the start. One day, however, he arrived unexpectedly to examine the plans. He walked heavily around the shed, looked closely at every detail of the plans, and snuffed at them once or twice, then stood for a little while contemplating them out of the corner of his eye. Then suddenly he lifted his leg, urinated over the plants, and walked out without uttering a word. The whole farm was deeply divided on the subject of the windmill. Snowball did not deny that to build it would be a difficult business. Stone would have to be carried and built up into walls. Then the sails would have to be made, and after that there would be need for dynamos and cables. How these were to be procured, Snowball did not say, but he maintained that it could all be done in a year. And thereafter, he declared, so much labor would be saved that the animals would only need to work 3 days a week. Napoleon, on the other hand, argued that the great need of the moment was to increase food production, and that if they wasted time on the windmill, they would all starve to death. The animals formed themselves into 2 factions under the slogan, vote for Snowball and the 3-day week, and vote for Napoleon and the full manger. Benjamin was the only animal who did not side with either faction. He refused to believe either that food would become more plentiful or that the windmill would save work. Windmill or no windmill, he said, life would go on as it had always gone on. That is badly. Stop here. Okay. So, yeah, some of it we have already heard, and some of it on the board is also older stuff, right? Snowball does not deny that building the windmill would be very difficult, and in fact he explains how stone would have to be brought for the walls, and that's certainly not an easy thing. Where are they gonna get it? You have to dig it up somewhere. Then you have to build walls. You have to make sails for the for the sails of the windmill, right? Maybe they'll look a little bit like this, right? Yeah, and maybe they get connected in between a little bit, right, with some wood to make them a more stable, right, connecting them a little bit, or here on the outside, don't know. Yeah, and then your windmill goes around that, right? So that needs sails. How to make it? Can the animals sew? I don't think. Even though some of them are pigs. Haha, play of words. Um, Also, dynamos and cables would need to be procured. Procured is just a fancy word for to get, to receive, right? Maybe also to obtain. We're supposed to not use red so much. Dynamos, right? That's the opposite. Well, that's basically physically the opposite of engine, of motor, in that a motor turns electricity into motion, a dynamo turns motion into electricity. You know how this works, right? And cables too. The farm doesn't have any electricity, and so therefore there are no electrical cables whatsoever, right? What would Mr. Jones have had them for? There's no electricity on the farm. Um, yeah, so how would you get them? He didn't say. Maybe he would trade for them somehow, but he didn't say, and yeah, I don't know. Maybe we'll never find out. Um, anyway, and then the animals are in two groups, that being two factions, right? If it's a political belief kind of group, then maybe that's a faction. And well, in fact, having a two-faction only political system is common now in the world, but it's also quite bad, right? Like in America, where there's really only two parties that matter. There are smaller parties, but everyone says, so what? Nobody cares, right? There's a Green Party, there's a Libertarian Party, there's a whatever party. People don't know, people don't care, and they are never going to make any real impact. There's only two major factions, the Democrats and the Republicans, and that means, and they are divided pretty much at the 50% mark, right? And that means 50% of all the voters will always get what they want, and the other 50 or 49.9% will not get what they want. And so that's a problem, and that leads to more infighting, right? Leads to more well, yeah, entrenchment, right? People dig into their positions and then don't wanna make don't wanna agree with each other, right? Compromise. Don't wanna compromise. Anyway, they have slogans too. Every faction has a slogan, like for marketing, right? A little bit like a motto, or what's that word I always keep forgetting? Mantra? No, not that. Um, what is the word? Maxim. The maxim, that's just a sentence that explains what you want, right? And so Snowball's slogan is vote for Snowball and the 3-day week. So Snowball promises prosperity in the future, right? Because he knows what he says, it will be hard, very hard to build the windmill, but then after that we will be rich in a way that we don't need to work very much, right? Lots of leisure time, and machines will be doing our work for us. Meanwhile, Napoleon, always the practical person, he says, yeah, well, that's all good and well, but what he promises is food. Food and power. Well, maybe not so much power, safety. Food and safety. He does talk about power later, but rather to the animals, it's all about the safety, right? And his slogan is, vote for Napoleon and the full manger. A manger is like a box that, yeah, animals will eat out of. A little bit maybe like a cave. And, what? Oh, here. You might have heard this word in the story. How does this go? What am I doing? uh, 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 uh. Okay, good enough, right? In the story of Jesus Christ, that he was born in a manger, in a barn. Yeah, and so this is this kind of holder for food, right? Horses would, for example, eat out of it. You throw whatever you have, hay or grass or leftover vegetables. You throw it in here and they eat out of it. Shoot. So vote for Napoleon and the full manger. That's his promise of food. And food means safety, and safety means power. And so, okay, fair enough, I suppose. And he also scares them in that if they vote for the windmill, they would starve to death. That's a bit, that I wrote this down again because that is the vocabulary that the other farmers use, right? The exact same term, oh, they would surely starve to death. Now Napoleon is using it himself to scare the animals against voting for Snowball and for voting for him. So those are the factions. Let's continue. So let's continue, and I can quickly say, yeah, things are going from bad to worse in a way. You can see that also in the vocabulary. There's a lot of militaristic vocabulary, right? It's all about strategy and fighting and not to be conquered by the enemy and who those enemies might be. So it's a lot of talk about military action, and that's because in what the book symbolizes, we are now in the pre-World War II time, right? Where, well, everybody can see, right, what Nazi Germany is doing, right? Nazi Germany is building up its army, pretending that it doesn't, right? Promises everyone, army? No! You are crazy! We're not doing any of that. But nobody really believes it. Nobody really trusts Hitler. You have no reason to trust Hitler. The Adolf Hitler as a character is in this book, right? It's Mr. Frederick from Pinchfield. Well, anyway, there's lots and lots of talk here about fighting, and that you see also in the vocabulary. I shall continue. Apart from the disputes over the windmill, there was the question of the defense of the farm. It was fully realized that though the human beings had been defeated in the Battle of the Cowshed, they might make another and more determined attempt to recapture the farm and reinstate Mr. Jones. They had all the more reason for doing so because the news of their defeat had spread across the countryside and made the animals on the neighboring farms more restive than ever. As usual, Snowball and Napoleon were in disagreement. According to Napoleon, what the animals must do was to procure firearms and train themselves in the use of them. According to Snowball, they must send out more and more pigeons and stir up rebellion among the animals on the other farms. The one argued that if they could not defend themselves, they were bound to be conquered. The other argued that if rebellion happened everywhere, they would have no need to defend themselves. Stop here. Shorter part, lots of vocabulary. Well, first of all, I was going to point out, George Orwell was a, British person, right? Born somewhere else, but to British people, right? And so this is a British writer, and as such, he writes defense with a C, because that's British English. And so, why do I want to point this out? Well, you normally see that American English, right, with an S. However, you can now see, does defense have anything to do with fence? So building a wall, and the answer is yes, it does. It does have something to do with fencing. Now you say, well, what about the verb to fence? not building a fence. No, no, no. Fighting with a like rapier or saber, that would be fencing, right? Does that have to do with defense too? Yes, it does. They're all in the same family. And when in American English they changed this to S, well then that broke up that relationship needlessly, right? It's still in this family, but you can't see it anymore with the S in defense. So yeah, I just wanted to point that out. So they're arguing about the windmill. That's all good and well, but in addition, they argue about the defense of the farm because, well, everyone agrees, even Snowball and Napoleon, the humans might make another attempt, so a try, right? Another try. Try at what? Try to recapture the farm. For what reason? Well, to reinstate Mr. Jones. Yeah, and as I said, right, these are all these military-like terms, right? Recapture, reinstate as the ruler, right? As the ruler, Mr. Jones. Then later, right? Conquer, firearms, defend again. Yeah. So maybe they would try again, right? And because last time it was not a very serious attempt, right? Mr. Jones brought a gun, but everyone else was taking it easy, right? Only brought a stick. And the gun was the big threat, right? Snowball knew it, and that's why he attacked Mr. Jones personally, and he got a medal for it, right? But he knew, right? The gun was the big threat. And surely Napoleon is also smart enough to know this, because Napoleon thinks, well, if guns are the problem, then, a little bit like the American way of thinking, then more guns are the answer. The animals, he thinks, need to procure firearms themselves. Yeah, rifles for the pigs, right? At least for the pigs. Maybe put a machine gun on the donkey or on a cow. That would be nice. And then, well, why? Well, because then they can defend themselves and not be conquered. Again, right, that's a pretty straightforward plan. Napoleon is nothing if not practical. Guns are the problem, thus we need more guns, then problem is solved. But Snowball says, no, 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 no. We have something else going on. We have our minds, you know, and we have, I don't know, we have righteousness on our side, right? Because the revolution is righteous, right? It is just and fair that the humans should be banned and cast out and the animals should be free. And therefore, we just need to send out more pigeons to stir up rebellion on the other farms. Then, if there's rebellion on the other farms, then the other farms will become free, well, the animals anyway, and then there will be no need to defend themselves. So, Snowball is making a bit of a metaphysical point, maybe, in that they have justification, right? They are morally right. They are morally right because freedom is good and oppression is bad. So the animals on the other farms just need a little push because it should be easy because they are morally right, right? Okay. Hurry up. Moving on. About the last part one more time. I didn't talk about restive. Restive is adjective. It's a little bit like restless, but not the same as restless. So in the part it says the news of the defeat of the humans had spread across the other farms, and so the animals on the other farms were even more restive than before. That means they nobody can hold them down and make them hold still. They want to break free. I did say it here, right? They don't want to be controlled. Restless is a little bit like it, but not the same in that you don't want to sit still because you're bored, right? Or you feel that you need to be doing something, right? And so you can't calm down. Both having to do with rest, as in not moving, right? At rest. Has something to do with be at rest, being not moving, holding still. Yeah, so that's for the last part. But so, we talked about, well, military strategy, but in fact, we want to get back to the windmill, and they'll do that now. The animals listened first to Napoleon, then to Snowball, and could not make up their minds which was right. Indeed, they always found themselves in agreement with the one who was speaking at the moment. At last, the day came when Snowball's plans were completed. At the meeting on the following Sunday, the question of whether or not to begin work on the windmill was to be put to the vote. When the animals had assembled in the big barn, Snowball stood up, though occasionally interrupted by bleating from the sheep, set forth his reasons for advocating the building of the windmill. Then Napoleon stood up to reply. He said, very quietly, that the windmill was nonsense and that he advised nobody to vote for it, and promptly sat down again. He had spoken for barely 30 seconds and seemed almost indifferent as to the effect he produced. At this, Snowball sprang to his feet and, shouting down the sheep, who had begun bleating again, broke into a passionate appeal in favor of the windmill. Until now, the animals had been about equally divided in their sympathies, but in a moment Snowball's eloquence had carried them away. In glowing sentences he painted a picture of Animal Farm as it might be when sordid labor was lifted from the animals' backs. His imagination had now run far beyond chaff cutters and turnip slicers. Electricity, he said, could operate threshing machines, plows, harrows, rollers and reapers and binders, besides supplying every stall with its own electric light, hot and cold water, and an electric heater. Want to stop here? Yes, stop here, because the board is full. So okay, as I said, back to the windmill, right? Snowball finishes the plans. On the Sunday that follows, they want to vote on it, because that's what they do, vote on Sundays. And Snowball sets forth his reasons. The force here is, put out, right? Put out his reasons. Force is a little bit like forward, right? But rather outward. Outward, yes. Force is like outward. So he sets forth his reasons for advocating for building the windmill. Advocating is to speak for something, right? Well, that's what it is. You can be an advocate yourself as a person. Then you're supposed to represent some idea and speak positively of it and hope, and to try and have it make real, maybe, right? Such as maybe you could be an advocate of the 5-day work week. 5-day work for everybody, right? No more Saturdays for nobody. Or if you do have to work on Saturdays, well, then you have to get another day off in the week, because everybody only should be working 5 days and have 2 days off, right? You could be an advocate for that and argue that is only fair, right? How come some people get 2 days off and some people don't? And how about some people get even less day offs, right? How about some people only get 3 in a month, right? Or 5 in 6 in 2 months. Anyway, And Snowball speaks for a long time, pointing out the advantages. And then Napoleon only talks for like 30 seconds and he says very quietly, it's dumb. I advise you not to vote for it. But he seemed indifferent even. Not caring either way, right? Indifferent is not to be caring one way or the other. Like, oh, what would you like for lunch? Oh, it's all fine, really. Whatever we have is fine. Not caring either way. Meanwhile, Snowball talks with great eloquence. Eloquence, well, yes, skill of talking, right? Skill of speaking. And we have learned before that Snowball is definitely advantaged in that way, right? He's the better speaker. And so Napoleon only talks for a short while, and Snowball thinks that's that's some kind of a trick, right? Because he spends so much effort on explaining. So he jumps up again, has to shout down the damn sheep that have been bleating again. And he explains one more time how beautiful the future will be once sordid labor is a thing of the past. Sordid being, what did I write? Dirty and unpleasant. Dirty, unpleasant kind of labor. Yeah, because with labor, right, there's the jobs that maybe some people want to do, right? I'm sure somebody wants to be a baker. I'm sure somebody wants to be a carpenter. But then there's also the kind of work nobody wants to do, such as digging holes, right? There are very few people that are perfectly happy just digging holes every day, right? Or sewer worker, drudging around in a sewer in other people's wastewater. Well, maybe some people enjoy it, but probably not that many. That'd be sordid labor, right? And he explains again now even more things they could have. Well, they wanted a threshing machine. That was one of their original problems, right? Could not thresh the corn efficiently. How about a plow? Well, the horses do all the plowing with with a sheep walking behind, telling them to go slow. What if the plow could be electric? I don't know. He also talks about a harrow. I had to look that up too. It's just another kind of thing that's like a plow. First you plow the ground, and then a harrow makes maybe the holes even deeper. I'm not sure. It just comes after plowing. Not sure. But also rollers and binders. That would be for, well, in fact, reapers and rollers and binders. To reap is to cut, right? Cut grass. And then once you have done that, or once it has been lying around to dry for a while, maybe, then you have to go over it again with a machine that picks it up and rolls it into a hay bale. No, this bale. So bale, yeah, like a ball, right? But no, it's not a ball. It's a roll with the hay sticking out, right? The hay sticking out everywhere. And then it still needs to be bound, maybe with string, right? So that it's easy to package and transport and store, but then also easy to open up when you need it. Then what if a machine could do all that? Wouldn't that be nice? And in modern times, of course, machines do all of this, right? And that's why larger and larger and larger farms can all be operated by like a handful of people, right? Maybe only 2 or 3 people can do thousands of acres of farmland as long as you grow plants that, machines can handle. For example, corn. Machines are very, very good with corn now. That's why corn farms can be incredibly big. Anyway, so these machines for the work but also in addition, electric light in every stall. Okay, that's nice. Hot and cold water. Wow, I don't know what cows need hot water for, but then again, you could say the same thing about humans, right? What do you need hot water for? And a heater in winter. Oh, so, and because of this great speech and these promises, they're probably all going to vote for Snowball. Poor Snowball, what's going to happen? Anyway, by the time he had finished speaking, there was no doubt as to which way the vote would go. But just at this moment, Napoleon stood up and, casting a peculiar, sidelong look at Snowball, uttered a high-pitched whimper of a kind no one had ever heard him utter before. At this, there was a terrible baying sound outside, and 9 enormous dogs wearing brass-studded collars came bounding into the barn. They dashed straight for Snowball, who only sprang from his place just in time to escape their snapping jaws. In a moment, he was out of the door, and they were after him. Too amazed and frightened to speak, all the animals crowded through the door to watch the chase. Snowball was racing across the long pasture that led to the road. He was running as only a pig can run, but the dogs were close on his heels. Suddenly he slipped, and it seemed certain that they had him. Then he was up again, running faster than ever. Then the dogs were gaining on him again. One of them all but closed his jaws on Snowball's tail, but Snowball whisked it free just in time. Then he put on an extra spurt, and with a few inches to spare, slipped through a hole in the hedge and was seen no more. Silent and terrified, the animals crept back into the barn. In a moment, the dogs came bounding back. At first, no one had been able to imagine where these creatures came from, but the problem was soon solved. They were the puppies whom Napoleon had taken away from their mothers and reared privately. Though not yet full grown, they were huge dogs, and as fierce looking as wolves. They kept close to Napoleon. It was noticed that they wagged their tails to him in the same way as the other dogs had been used to do to Mr. Jones. Wow. So whatever is going on here? Well, nothing short of hostile takeover, right? But hostile takeover is more of a business term. In politics, maybe it should rather be a coup. In fact, yeah, coup, right? It's a French word, coup. There is also coup d'etat, which is French for murdering whoever is in charge really swiftly. But that's not exactly what's going on maybe here. I mean, the dogs definitely tried to catch him and probably kill him. Still, coup d'etat is still a little bit more sneaky and fast than this, but nevertheless a coup. So Napoleon got up and gave Snowball a sidelong look. So it's like a secretive look from the side of your eyes, and it's maybe a hostile thing, right? And then he uttered again, right? To produce as a sound, to utter. It could be say, but it's not a say. He uttered a high-pitched whimper, maybe a little bit like whistling, because that's maybe what you do to dogs. You whistle. I cannot do that with my fingers, also they're not clean. I cannot whistle, but you can whistle to your dogs and then they come running. And indeed, these dogs come running. First of all, there's baying. Baying, if it's about dogs, it's the same as howling. So there's a loud howl outside, and these dogs come bounding in at first. Bound is to jump, right? Bound is kind of like leap. And in fact, you see that word sometimes in a phrase that's leaps and bounds. Leaps and bounds. Maybe that something advances really rapidly, right? I don't know. The 20th century was leaps and bounds of innovation, right? Meaning things change so quickly, so fast, right? Because leaping and bounding is all about jumping forward, right? Running in a jumpy fashion. Anyway, these dogs are very large. They're not fully grown yet because, later we learn, they are the 9 puppies that Napoleon took away from their 2 mothers and said he would make himself responsible for their education, but apparently all he did was to train them to be his security force, right? Or really his enforcers. These dogs with their brass studded collars, yeah, you know that, like a guard dog or an attack dog, right? One thing that people noticed is they're still vulnerable on the neck, right? Such as another dog could grab them by the neck and then still kill them somewhat easily, right? A bigger dog. Or a human too could maybe jump onto the dog, try to wrestle the dog down and choke it. It would be hard, but not impossible. But if you put some spikes on the neck, well, in fact, it doesn't say spikes here, it says studs. Well, it says studded, right, with studs on it. So they are not exactly 100% spiky, but they are certainly round, well, spiky enough, but a little bit round to be unpleasant for anybody who tries to grab them by the neck. Yeah. And then the dogs chase Snowball all through the farmyard and in fact all the way to the road, to the hedge, and Snowball does escape, but it's well, it's a close chase because the dogs have their snapping jars already on his tail, and he has to in fact whisk it, move it out of the way, otherwise they would have gotten him. Yeah, and then he escapes through the hedge, and the dogs and all the animals come back inside, and the dogs come bounding back, and they sit very close to Napoleon, and just like the older dogs used to do to Mr. Jones, they are wagging their tails happily in admiration of their master, Napoleon. And yeah, these dogs are not exactly educated as he promised. They are really just his enforcers, right? We can already see these fierce looking dogs, so aggressive, right? Bad and mean and aggressive. These aggressive dogs with collars, even though nobody is supposed to wear anything, are now going to be Napoleon's enforcers. Somebody who uses force to support you, right? Huh. And yeah, so that being the coup here, Napoleon had enough of arguing things with Snowball and, I don't know, of sharing power. Now he makes himself the ruler. Huh. And we'll read a little bit more, and not very much, and that's going to be it for today. Napoleon, with the dogs following him, now mounted onto the raised portion of the floor where Major had previously stood to deliver his speech. He announced that from now on their Sunday morning meetings would come to an end. They were unnecessary, he said, and wasted time. In future, all questions relating to the working of the farm would be settled by a special committee of pigs, presided over by himself. That is the last part. Not very much. So the time of having meetings on Sunday is over. Well, there will still be meetings. There will just be no debates and no voting. He will explain it in the next part really quickly. But you can already imagine how it is, right? Napoleon is mounting, so climbs onto the platform. The platform was where the much respected old major always sat and where he told them about his dream, right? But now Napoleon mounts itself there, right? Mounts himself there, means climbs onto it and sits there. And so he makes himself the ruler like that. Also, all matters of the workings of the farm would now be settled by a special committee. What's that? Politburo, right? In Russia, the keyword here would be Politburo. No. Buro? I think so. I think that's what maybe was the spelling. The special committee of pigs that do all the organizing and then just come out and announce what they have decided. And who do you think would be the president of this special committee? Well, of course it would be Napoleon. He would preside over it. And I'm saying that in this way, yeah, because preside is in the family with president, right? And yeah, you know how in these not so nice communist states, the chairman or the glorious leader gets a title like that, right? President, leader, glorious leader, chairman. But really, chairman doesn't sound so bad, right? Meaning you get a chair at a table of officials, they all decide together. No, not that kind of chairman. First of all, you're the chairman of almost everything, and you are really the only deciding force, right? You're the person who sits at the head of the table. Everyone else presents things to you, and you said, yeah, well, don't like it, don't like it, don't like it, off with your head. This is a good idea, we'll do that. And that's how you are the chairman, right? And that is where we shall stop. It makes perfect sense to stop here. Napoleon's takeover of all the power, pretty much. I wonder if that will just go over easily with the others or not. Nevertheless, I'll read you the whole part one more time, and then we'll stop, and this will probably be another long video. All of them came to look at Snowball's drawings at least once a day. Even the hens and ducks came, and were at pains not to tread on the chalk marks. Only Napoleon held aloof. He had declared himself against the windmill from the start. One day, however, he arrived unexpectedly to examine the plans. He walked heavily round the shed, looked closely at every detail of the plans, and snuffed at them once or twice, then stood for a little while contemplating them out of the corner of his eye. Then suddenly he lifted his leg, urinated over the plans, and walked out without uttering a word. The whole farm was deeply divided on the subject of the windmill. Snowball did not deny that to build it would be a difficult business. Stone would have to be carried and built up into walls, then the sails would have to be made, and after that there would be need for dynamos and cables. How these were to be procured, Snowball did not say, but he maintained that it could all be done in a year. And thereafter, he declared, so much labor would be saved, and that the animals would only need to work 3 days a week. Napoleon, on the other hand, argued that the great need of the moment was to increase food production, and that if they wasted time on the windmill, they would all starve to death. The animals formed themselves into 2 factions under the slogan, "Vote for Napoleon and the full..." Oh, no, the other one. The animals formed themselves into 2 factions under the slogan, "Vote for Snowball and the 3-day week," and "Vote for Napoleon and the full manger." Benjamin was the only animal who did not side with either faction. He refused to believe either that food would become more plentiful or that the windmill would save work. Windmill or no windmill, he said, life would go on as it had always gone on, that is badly. Apart from the disputes over the windmill, there was the question of the defense of the farm. It was fully realized that though the human beings had been defeated in the Battle of the Cowshed, they might make another and more determined attempt to recapture the farm and reinstate Mr. Jones. They had all the more reason for doing so because the news of their defeat had spread across the countryside and made the animals on the neighboring farms more restive than ever. As usual, Snowball and Napoleon were in disagreement. According to Napoleon, what the animals must do was to procure firearms and train themselves in the use of them. According to Snowball, they must send out more and more pigeons and stir up rebellion among the animals on the other farms. The one argued that if they could not defend themselves, they were bound to be conquered. The other argued that if rebellions happened everywhere, they would have no need to defend themselves. The animals listened first to Napoleon, then to Snowball, and could not make up their minds which was right. Indeed, they always found themselves in agreement with the one who was speaking at the moment. At last, the day came when Snowball's plans were completed. At the meeting on the following Sunday, the question of whether or not to begin work on the windmill was to be put to the vote. When the animals had assembled in the big barn, Snowball stood up and, though occasionally interrupted by bleating from the sheep, set forth his reasons for advocating the building of the windmill. Then Napoleon stood up to reply. He said very quietly that the windmill was nonsense and that he advised nobody to vote for it, and promptly sat down again. He had spoken for barely 30 seconds and seemed almost indifferent as to the effect he produced. At this, Snowball sprang to his feet and, shouting down the sheep, who had begun bleating again, broke into a passionate appeal in favor of the windmill. Until now, the animals had been about equally divided in their sympathies, but in a moment Snowball's eloquence had carried them away. In glowing sentences he painted a picture of Animal Farm as it might be when sordid labor was lifted from the animals' backs. His imagination had now run far beyond chaff cutters and turnip slicers. Electricity, he said, could operate threshing machines, plows, harrows, rollers and reapers and binders, besides supplying every stall with its own electric light, hot and cold water, and an electric heater. By the time he had finished speaking, there was no doubt as to which way the vote would go. But just at this moment, Napoleon stood up and, casting a peculiar sidelong look at Snowball, uttered a high-pitched whimper of a kind no one had ever heard him utter before. At this, there was a terrible baying sound outside, and 9 enormous dogs, wearing brass-studded collars, came bounding into the barn. They dashed straight for Snowball, who only sprang from his place just in time to escape their snapping jaws. In a moment, He was out of the door, and they were after him. Too amazed and frightened to speak, all the animals crowded through the door to watch the chase. Snowball was racing across the long pasture that led to the road. He was running as only a pig can run, but the dogs were close on his heels. Suddenly he slipped, and it seemed certain that they had him. Then he was up again, running faster than ever. Then the dogs were gaining on him again. One of them all but closed his jaws on Snowball's tail, but Snowball whisked it free just in time. Then he put on an extra spurt, and with a few inches to spare, slipped through a hole in the hedge, and was seen no more. Silent and terrified, the animals crept back into the barn. In a moment, the dogs came bounding back. At first, no one had been able to imagine where these creatures came from, but the problem was soon solved. They were the puppies whom Napoleon had taken away from their mothers and reared privately. Though not yet full grown, they were huge dogs and as fierce looking as wolves. They kept close to Napoleon. It was noticed that they wagged their tails to him in the same way as the other dogs had been used to do to Mr. Jones. Napoleon, with the dogs following him, now mounted onto the raised portion of the floor where Major had previously stood to deliver his speech. He announced that from now on the Sunday morning meetings would come to an end. They were unnecessary, he said, and wasted time. In future, all questions relating to the workings of the farm would be settled by a special committee of pigs, presided over by himself. And this is where we shall stop today. I think a lot has happened. We have found the puppies. The puppies are now agents of a dictator, the enforcers of Napoleon. Snowball escaped through a hole in the hedge with only a few inches to spare. Maybe we'll see him again, maybe not. Anyway, it looks a little bit glum on the farm right now. This is where we shall stop. Goodbye.